Okay, I feel like if Greg had a favorite song, that would have to be it because it is all about money, and so is Greg. Mrs. Lawson here. I'm so glad you're back to read Lunch Money with us today, fourth graders, and we're going to read chapters 2 and 3 today. So let me go ahead and share the learning intention. We are learning to refer to details and examples in the text to describe our main character, Greg. We know we are successful today when we can describe the main character's actions, refer back to details about the main character, which we now know as Greg, and describe what motivates Greg. So our first vocabulary word might be a little tricky to say. Can you guys figure it out? Yeah, it is initiative. And it says here, the principal said, well, I admire your initiative, but starting right now, you may not sell any more toys at school. And then we have these people that are stepping up to do something. So what do you think initiative means? Good job, fourth graders. It is the power or opportunity to do something before others do it. You're taking initiative. What about this word? Do you know how to say that word? Nuisance is the word, and it says the boys and girls already bring plenty of other nuisance items to school, and they do not need extra help from you. Is that clear? And we also have a dog that's kind of being a nuisance barking. So what do you think nuisance means? Yeah, something annoying or unnecessary. It might be a sibling is being a nuisance when you're trying to do something. But let's work on our foundational skill. We have these 3 words. Do you guys think you can find the base word that makes them all related? Can you find it? Good job. It is express. So express means to put into words. So an expression is something that somebody has said. If you're being expressive, that means you're putting into words what you mean. And if you expressed something, it means you already said it. You already put it into words because it's in the past tense. So sometimes the related words are different parts of speech. So express was the verb, expression is a noun, and expressive is an adjective. And expressed is just in that past tense, kind of like what I said. So a lot of those words that are related are just the same thing, but in different parts of speech. So for today, you're going to use that story that we used in our last lesson, and you're going to focus on these 5 different words. And you're going to try and figure out what is the correct way to spell them. You have this story to go back and see if it will help you, and you're going to try and circle the correct spelling. All right, we are on to chapter 2, and it is called Quarters. So let me get my arrow. It was near the end of his 5th grade year. Around 11:30 one morning during silent reading, Greg felt hungry, so he had started to think about his lunch. A ham and cheese sandwich, a bag of nacho cheese Doritos, a bunch of red grapes, and an apple cherry juice box. His mom had made him a bag lunch, which was fine with Greg. Making a lunch was a lot cheaper than buying one, and Greg loved saving money whenever possible. Plus, home food was usually better than school food. And on days he brought a bag lunch, his mom also gave him 50 cents to buy dessert, which was also fine with Greg. Sometimes he bought a treat, and sometimes he held on to the money. On this particular day, he had been planning to spend both quarters on an ice cream sandwich. Then Greg remembered where his lunch was. At home on the kitchen counter. He did have $1 of his own money in his wallet, and he had 2 quarters from his mom in his front pocket, but a whole school lunch cost $2. He needed 2 more quarters. So Greg had walked to the front of the classroom, waited until his teacher looked up from her book, and then said, Mrs. McCormick, I left my lunch at home. May I borrow 50 cents? Mrs. McCormick had not missed a teaching opportunity in 20 years. So she shook her head, and in a voice loud enough for the whole class to hear, she said, I'm sorry, but no, I will not lend you money. Do you know what would happen if I handed out 50 cents to all the boys and girls who forgot their lunches? I'd go broke, that's what. You need to learn to remember these things for yourself. Then, turning to the class, Mrs. McCormick had announced, Greg needs some money. Can someone lend him 50 cents? Over half of the kids in the class raised a hand. Embarrassed, Greg had hurried over to Brian Lamont. and Brian handed him 2 quarters. Thanks, Greg said. Pay you back tomorrow. 10 minutes later, Greg was in the cafeteria line, shaking all 4 quarters around in his pocket. They made a nice clinking sound, and that had reminded Greg how much he liked quarters. Stack up 4, and you've got $1. Stack up 20 quarters, that's $5. Greg remembered one day when he had piled up all his quarters on his dresser, 4 stacks, and each had been over a foot tall. Stacking up quarters like that always made Greg feel rich. So, on that day in April of his 5th grade year, Greg had started looking around the cafeteria, and everywhere he looked, he saw quarters. He saw kids trading quarters for ice cream sandwiches and cupcakes and cookies at the dessert table. He saw kids over at the school store trading quarters for neon pens and sparkly pencils and for little decorations like rubber soccer balls and plastic butterflies to stick on the ends of those new pencils. He saw Albert Hobart drop 3 quarters into a machine so he could have a cold can of juice with his lunch. Kids were buying extra food, fancy pens, pencils, special drinks, and snacks. There were quarters all over the place, buckets of them. And then Greg remembered those hands that had been raised in the classroom. All those kids who had an extra couple of quarters to lend him. Extra quarters. Excited, Greg had started making some calculations in his head. Another one of his talents. There were about 450 4th, 5th, and 6th graders at Ashworth Intermediate School. If even half of those kids had 2 extra quarters to spend each day, then there'd have to be at least 400 quarters floating around the school. That was $100 a day, over $500 each week. Money, extra money just jingling around in pockets and lunch bags. At that moment, Greg's view of school changed completely and forever. School had suddenly become the most interesting place on the planet because young Greg Kenton had decided that school would be an excellent place to make his fortune. All right, we're on to chapter 3, The Perfect Hammer. The very next day, Greg had started selling candy and gum in the shadow of the sliding board during lunch recess. Gum was 10 cents a stick, and he sold tropical fruit Starburst at 3 for a quarter. Sales were brisk, and Greg was making some money, but it was risky. Kids took the candy and gum into the classroom, which was against school rules. And if one kid had turned him in, Greg would have found himself having a little chat with the principal, Mrs. Davenport. So Greg began to look around for other things he could sell. He thought about the ads on TV when he watched his favorite shows. What did they always try to sell to kids, besides candy and breakfast cereal? Simple toys. Greg did some research on the internet and quickly discovered dozens of companies that sold toys and souvenirs and gadgets at incredibly low prices. You need to do what? That's what Greg's mom had said when he told her he needed to borrow her credit card. And Greg had explained, I need to buy some toys, not for me. They're to sell to the other kids to make some money. This company has great stuff and it's really cheap, but I need to order with a credit card. And I can pay you back with cash right away if that's what you're worried about. His mom was actually worried about something else. She thought Greg spent too much time thinking about making money. Just a few days before, she had asked her husband, is it something we've done to make Greg like this? All he ever thinks about is getting rich. I wanted to just enjoy being a kid, hang out with his friends more, have more fun. But her husband had told her, as far as I can see, Greg's definitely a kid. He likes to read and draw, he plays sports, and he gets good grades. I'd say he's pretty well balanced, and he seems to be having plenty of fun. This money thing is probably just a phase. Besides, there is nothing wrong with wanting to make money or working hard. If that's what you call a problem, then I wish some other people in this family had it too. So his mom had used her credit card to help Greg place an order with the Knick Knack Novelty Company. He ordered 144 miniature troll dolls, tiny plastic creatures with big eyes and long bright hair, blue, red, orange, and green. Then Greg paid his mom $12 in cash to cover the cost of the credit card order, $10.50 for the trolls, and $1.50 for the shipping cost. The little trolls were a huge hit at school, an instant fad. Greg sold all 144 of them in 3 days for a quarter each. taking in a total of $36.24 of that money was pure profit. But Greg didn't call it profit. He liked to think of it as new money. Greg had taken $12 he already had. That was the old money, and he had used his old money to buy 144 trolls for about 80 cents a piece. Then he sold each one for 25 cents. So he had made back all $12 of his old money plus $24 of new money. And what did Greg do with his new money? He used it to place another bigger order with the Knick Knack Novelty Company. 48 more trolls, 48 miniature Super Balls, 24 small Jack and Ball sets, 48 sticky stretchy spiders, and 36 plastic rings, 12 for boys and 24 for girls. But the new items hadn't sold so well. After 2 weeks, only about 2/3 of the second order was gone. Kids had started to get bored with his product, and so had Greg. And there was a problem. During third period language arts one morning, he'd been called to the school office. And then he was shown into the principal's office. The first thing Greg noticed was the toys on her desk. Mrs. Davenport followed his eyes and nodded at the 4 mini Super Balls and the wad of sticky, stretchy spiders. She said, "I got the Super Balls from Miss Kensing. She caught Eddie Connors and Hector Vega bouncing them up and hitting the light on the ceiling of the gym. And I got the spiders from Mr. Percy, the custodian. He said these things have left oily marks on almost every window in the school. Mr. Percy tells me that all the kids he asked said they bought them from you. Is that true?" Greg nodded. "Why are you selling toys at school?" she asked. Greg shrugged. "To make some money and because they're fun." Mrs. Davenport said, "These tiny trolls I saw all over the school a few weeks ago, were you the one selling those too?" Greg nodded. The principal said, "Well, I admire your initiative, but starting right now, you may not sell any more toys at school. The boys and girls already bring plenty of other nuisance items to school, and they do not need any extra help from you. Is that clear?" Greg nodded and said, "Yes." "Very well. You may return to your class now. Ask Mrs. Ogden for a pass." Walking back to language arts that day, Greg hadn't been discouraged. So we're going to say the focus question. What details make the reader want to know more about Greg's plan? So we know Greg has a plan. Let's keep reading. He faced the fact that his novelty toy business had been doomed from the start. For one thing, kids usually get tired of toys quickly. And Greg also realized it was amazing that his toy sales hadn't been shut down even sooner. If you sell toys to kids at school, that's where the kids will play with them. And toys in school are a bad mix. Still, even though he hadn't sold all the toys from the second order, he'd made a small profit. Greg carefully reviewed what the principal had said to him. And again, he saw the bright side. Because Mrs. Davenport had not said that he just had to stop selling things at school. She had just said he had to stop selling toys. So all he needed was something else he could sell at school. Something that wouldn't upset the teachers or Mrs. Davenport or the custodian. Even better, it would be great to sell something that they would actually approve of. But what? What? The answer came to Greg as the first few days of summer began turning 5th grade into a fading memory. The answer was so simple, and it seemed absolutely foolproof. It would take some hard work if he wanted to have everything ready in September for the start of 6th grade. But hard work was something Greg had never been afraid of, especially if the rewards were great enough. And he expected the rewards to be astounding. School was like a giant piggy bank loaded with quarters. Greg was convinced that his new product would be like a hammer, the perfect hammer. He was going to crack the school wide open. Okay, so I know I really want to know what Greg's plan is, and what details made me want to know. Well, when he described it like a hammer, knocking it open, I'm like, ooh, this is going to be a really good idea. What other things stuck out to you about his plan? They said down here it was so simple, absolutely foolproof. It would take him all summer to do. What's going to take him all summer? It's hard work. But he said the rewards are going to be astounding. So it's going to take him a while to do. and it's going to be astounding what happens, and he's going to make a lot of money. So makes me really want to know what he's going to do. All right, fourth graders, what conclusion can we draw about Greg from all of this? What did you learn about him? Kind of like what we just figured out, he's going to keep selling something, and it's not a toy, and it's going to be something that they approve of. So what do you think that teachers would approve of? And then why does this phrase, no pain, no gain, remind you of Greg and his actions? What do those both have in common? So that last little piece right there told us that he is willing to work all summer because he figured it out just a few days. It says the answer came to him as the first few days of summer happened, but he had to work really hard to get it ready by September. So May, June, July, August, September, he had a lot of months that he's got to work really hard to get this plan done. So he's not afraid of hard work. Greg will do that hard work if it means he can earn money from it. All right, reading response for today. What details in the story reveal what is important to Greg? We keep learning more and more about him. So give me some more details that show us what is important to Greg. Have a great rest of your day, fourth graders. Bye.